So glad you're with us today. I hope you had a good New Year's and learn how to put the past year behind us legitimately and kind of like get the, give us this day our daily bread, what we need in the moment. And there's an art and a skill to that. But anyway, glad you're here. Hey, just like our parents had a life before they got married, and everybody that's married had a life before they got married, so did our first parents. Of course, I'm talking about Adam and Eve, not the ones that gave direct birth to us, but the ones who started it all. And there are some things that are true about them that are still true about us as well. And it's going to be very interesting as we begin a story on All in the Family. All in the Family. And we're going to be in this for several weeks, and I hope you'll be with us week by week because this is going to help you. So some of you are married, some of you hope to be married someday, and so whether that's true for you, wherever you are on that, I know this will be encouraging. And if you're not married, you can at least pray for those who are, because statistically, couples struggle. I'm not going to go through those statistics, but it can be sad news. And as a person who's done a lot of weddings in life and have facilitated divorce care ministry, I've seen both ends of that spectrum and the battles in between, and have been able to help a lot of people overcome their struggles, and sadly still watch a lot of people succumb to the divorce. So it's kind of a sad news sometimes when it comes to marriage. Some people think that the story of Adam and Eve in the Bible, and that's where we're going to start. Some people think that that's kind of like an Aesop's fable. There's some good truth there, but they weren't really real people. I tend to think that they're real people, and the main reason I think that they're real people is because as I read Jesus, Jesus seemed to think that they were real people. And you can look that up in Matthew chapter 19, verses 1 through 9. We'll get to that passage, not today, but at some time in this series. And so I just go with Jesus. That's just it may sound simplistic, but if anybody can accurately predict their death and resurrection and then pull it off, I'm all in. Just to be honest with you, I'm all in with that person. And as far as I know, Jesus is the only one that was ever able to do that, ever did that. So whether you believe in a literal Adam or Eve or not, there is still some vital truth to gain from this. And we're going to look at that. Do you know that what was said at their wedding ceremony is still said at a lot of weddings today? Wow. That's like, however many thousands of years ago, what was spoken by their wedding officiant, it's been spoken, I know, in every wedding I've ever done, and most weddings I'm pretty sure that I've ever been a part of. And it's these words, just be familiar to you. For this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and will cleave or cling to his wife. And that comes right out of a passage of Scripture that we're going to get to next week, but not this week. I just kind of like, that's the teaser, for that. So anyway, but most people don't know what for this reason is. Like, okay, there's a reason, but what's the reason? We quote it, we know it, it's said at weddings, but what is that? We'll get to that next week. So, here we go. I'm going to create an analogy for us, an analogy that's going to help us go through this sermon series. And the analogy is a river. And if you look very carefully, well, there you go. Got a good. There's two separate rivers there, and they come together and form a larger river, and that's called a confluence, right? You got when two rivers come together, and that happens all over the world. And here's some. If you think of your life as a river, here's some rules of the river. Every river has a starting point. Your life has a starting point. So every river has a starting point, and every river has good and bad in it. There's no such thing as a perfect river. Every river has good and bad in it. And some of these good and bad things were put into the river several generations back. Whether we realize it or not, what has come to us in our life was put into it by parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, several, and all the way back to Adam and Eve. There are some things that have flowed to us in our river of life that have come from generations back. Some of it may have just been a generation or two back. Some of the things that flowed into my river was alcoholism and divorce. My dad was married 3 times. My mom was married 4, so there was a lot of divorces there. My sister has been divorced 3 times. My brother's been divorced 2 times. My oldest sister has had 2 different husbands, but they both died of various diseases, so that doesn't count in terms of the divorce. But I know what that's like. I know that. So I'm an adult child of dysfunction. I'm an adult child of divorce. I'm an adult child of alcoholism. And, that was just life for me growing up. I took it for granted. I didn't think, but it wasn't until I got into, the counseling end of things and start reading, and it's like, wow, I'm an adult child of divorce. I have some of those characteristics. I'm an adult child of alcoholism. Wow, I have some of those characteristics. Wow, I'm an adult child of family dysfunction. Like, yeah, I have some of those characteristics. It's like things flow to us, and it's inevitable. You can't avoid it, right? It's just part of being a part of the human race. So, we're not, and this is what you need to know, we're not responsible for what's flowed to us from previous generations. We're affected by it, but should I feel guilty because there was alcoholism that was in the previous generation or 2 in my family? No, I'm not responsible, and I shouldn't feel guilty or bad because of that. Now, obviously, it has an impact, and then there's some sad things that obviously come out of that, but not responsible for that. I love these words from Ezekiel chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. It says, "The word of the Lord came to me," and that means the word of the Lord happened. It came to me. What do you people mean by quoting this proverb about the land of Israel? So this was the proverb. And God is kind of saying like, hey, come on, let's get over this. This is not true. But this was a common proverb. The parents eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. That's like saying a child is responsible for what their parents do. And God is saying, no, let's just end this. Now, you'll know there's a difference between a child being affected by what parents do or don't do, right? But that's not the same as being responsible for it. So look at what it says. As surely, verse 3, Ezekiel 18, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, you will no longer quote this proverb in Israel, for everyone belongs to me, the parent as well as the child, both alike belong to me. The one who sins is the one who will die. In other words, the one who sins is responsible for their sin. We're affected by the sin of our parents, but we are not responsible for the sin of our parents. We need that. There's a distinction that we need to make. And as a counselor, I've just talked to so many people who feel guilty because this stuff was in their family and it flowed to them in the river. We're affected by it, but we're not responsible for it. Romans 14:12, this is a verse that is so freeing when you really think about it. So then each of us will give an account of ourselves to God. Now what that means is each of us are accountable and responsible for our own life. So if this was a parenting seminar, I would say, parents, you're not responsible for the life of your children. You're responsible to your children to love them, encourage them, teach them, train them, but you are not responsible for what they do with it. Now, will there be heartache? Could there be joy? Yeah, there's the consequences that come, but that's different from feeling guilty because my children did or didn't, or taking joy, and there's joy and there's pride, I get that, but feeling like I'm responsible for how smart they turned out. No, they could have turned out different. They could have made different choices. And so, but that's a powerful thing to know. I'm accountable for my life. I'm responsible for my life. I'm responsible for what happens in my life. I'm not responsible for what comes to me. I'm responsible for what I do with it. Make sense? Yeah, and there's things we have to learn to face and to deal with in life. Now, keep in mind, I thought we were going to talk about family. Well, we are. But family, just like I had 22 years of singleness before I got married, there was a lot of singleness that flowed through that river in that period of time. So we're affected. Exodus 25, 20 verse 5 is a verse that I've heard interpreted a lot of ways through the years. And this is what it says: "For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, and punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me." And I went, didn't you just say, Pastor Jeff, that children are not going to be punished for the sin? Yeah, I did. And I think Ezekiel straightens it out. I think there's a misunderstanding of what this verse means. And what it means is children will be affected by, not punished for. If I rob a bank and go to jail, Jonathan doesn't go to jail because I robbed a bank. It's just like, we know logically it doesn't make sense. So that interpretation, so that's why I dealt with the Ezekiel 18 passage. So things have flowed to us that have come to us in our river of life. But we've each dumped things into our own river, right? Good or bad. We've each made choices, good and bad, that have affected our lives. So if you think of a river, we've dumped pollution into our own river. That's Scripture says all have polluted the river and come short of the glory of God. All of us have sinned. All of us have things that we've put into our own river. And all of us have no doubt made good choices, and there's things that are in their river. So in reality, everybody's life, everybody's river is a mixture of good and bad, right? Have you come to terms with that in life? That your life, your river, is a mixture of good and bad, muddy and clear? Have you come to terms with that? Because that's just reality. Now, here's what's true. Every river can be cleaned up. Every river can be cleaned up. Now, the reality is no river until Jesus comes will ever be perfectly cleaned up. And in reality, it's a lifelong journey of having the opportunity to learn to clean up our rivers, to deal with stuff that have come to us, and to deal with the ways that we dealt with what came to us, and then to deal with the things that we've done in our own life so that we don't keep making the same mistakes. Every river can be cleaned up, and every river can be freshly polluted. A person whose life is going along pretty good can all of a sudden decide, I don't know, I knew a couple once that got $90,000 in credit card debt. Going along pretty well in life, and all of a sudden, I don't know how sudden it was, but boom, their river got pretty polluted with that kind of debt. And they cleaned up their river, to be honest with you. They spent 7 years, didn't go out to eat, didn't buy pizza, and he was an engineer, had a pretty good job, but they went nowhere, did nothing but pay off their debt in 7 years. I was proud of them. They didn't file for bankruptcy. They took responsibility for their river, and they cleaned up that part of it. So every river can be cleaned up, but every river can be freshly polluted as well. We can make bad choices today, tomorrow. And now here's another thing about rivers. Every river affects other rivers. Every river affects other rivers. If you remember that picture we had, one of those was pretty clear and the other one was pretty muddy. And when it came together, those two rivers start affecting each other. And it's the closeness of proximity, like family. That's where one polluted river in a family that's really never been cleaned up. You got a mom, you got a dad that's never dealt with their issues. There's alcoholism, anger, there can be fear, insecurity. I mean, you name it, it's never been dealt with. That flows into their family and sets a tone in the entire family. Now, that can be happening in the house next door to me, and it doesn't affect me because I'm not in that close proximity. Or if it's happening in my house, it's not affecting the house down the street. But it is affecting the rivers that get intertwined, right? You follow that? It does. It's inevitable. If you ever look at a map of the Amazon River, like overhead, look at it, it's like all these tributaries just all together there. And it's every river affects other things. And I've already said this, and I hope you come to terms with this. There's no such thing as a perfect river. The pursuit of perfection is an illusion because it'll never happen. There are always things, the last thing I want to say about the rivers is that there's always things in every river that will need to be cleaned up. And just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Just because you don't see it. So we can be in denial. We can just think this is no big deal, and it really is, which is a form of denial. We can think, I'm not affecting anybody but myself, and we're not seeing how that's affecting other people, and it's just the reality. So what we're going to get to, not today, because we're talking about the rivers before they become in that confluence where the two become one flesh. We'll talk about that a little bit more next week, but we're talking about the things that are in the river. So but what's cool is, not cool, here's the reality. Good and bad, flowing in a river. When that river flows together in marriage, guess what happens? Things start going bump in the night. The bad in me starts bumping into the bad in Terry. And now it's cool when the good bumps into the good because then there's no sparks. Or in a good moment, if my bad bumps into Terry when she's got a good moment, she's just loving me anyway. And she's not returning evil for evil. But when the bad bumps into the bad and both of them are so you can begin to see where we're going with this and how practical this is going to be for you in your marriage or in your future marriage. But what I want to shift to now is the first of us. The headwaters of the human race, Adam and Eve. Genesis 1:26 through 28. This is where it starts. And let me just say this. This is some of the most important things you need to know about yourself. In fact, this is the first thing that God tells us about us. So I've often asked people, what's the very first thing that God tells us about us in the Bible? And most people that I've asked that question to kind of wonder where I'm going with it. So I get it. I'm kind of catching them off guard, but most people don't know how to answer the question. This is the first thing God tells us about us. This is the first thing God reveals about you. And let's just personalize it. This is the headwaters. This is where it starts with us. Now there's other things that have already started in Genesis up to verse 26, the creation of the heavens and the earth and the sun and the moon and the stars and all that's happening. So we get down to towards the end of that chapter, we get to 26, and this is what it says. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image. Let's make man in our image. The us there is the Trinity. In fact, in the beginning, God, that word God is in Hebrew, Elohim, and it's a plural word. That throws some people off. In the beginning, God's created the heavens and the earth. Like, whoa, I thought there was just one God. Well, there is. In Deuteronomy 6, it says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Wait a second. Doesn't God's, plural, same word, the Lord our God's is one. Yeah, so that's the beginning of what we've come to understand as the Trinity. So there's the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, as mentioned right there from the let us make mankind, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. That's the most important thing about you. It is. And chances are it's something that you take for granted or have never bought into the stock that it can bring to your life. And yet it's the most important thing about us. Created in the image of God. And this next is still so they can rule over the fish. Aren't you glad you get to rule over the fish? Of the sea and the birds in the air and over the livestock and all the wild things and over all the creatures that move along the ground. Well, there it gets a little bit more pertinent there because there was a serpent that came crawling along the ground a couple of chapters later. And notice Adam and Eve, mankind was created to rule over everything about this planet and everything on it. Like, whoa, that's pretty important, isn't it? So one of the ways of thinking about it is we're managers, we're stewards of what God has created. And we'll talk, so I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So God created mankind, man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, increase in number. Which, let me say, that's kind of like the one command God made that we got right. Fill the earth, subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. So here's the things that are true about us. These things, and I hope you'll personalize this, because this is true of you and me. This is true. This has flown. This has come down to us in our river. All right? This stuff is still true in the river of humanity. Now, this has gotten muddy, but it's still true. We are not self-made. We are not. None of us are None of us chose our existence. Now that ought to be humbling to you. You and I are not the choice. Our existence is not because we decided, hey, I think I'll show up in my mother's womb. We're not self-made. We did not choose our existence. And of course, then the reality is that we are created. We are created. We're created. Life comes from life. Isn't that true? Life comes from life. Life comes from life. I heard Ken Ham say this from Answers in Genesis years ago. He used this analogy. Suppose scientists were to put all these chemicals into a beaker and then somehow supercharge it with electricity and boom, some kind of lower form of life came out of that. Well, his question was, would that prove evolution? Or would that prove that life comes from life? Would that be more like intelligent design? Or just some great big cosmic accident? So I remember being in middle school. Well, man, time flies. But I'm going to throw this in. I remember being in middle school. I did not grow up in church, never read the Bible, wasn't instructed in the Bible of any way, shape, or form as a kid. And in middle school, I remember in science class, I'm talking about what used to be called the theory of evolution. It used to be called the theory of evolution. Now it's presented as fact. But there was a day it was called the theory of evolution. And I remember them talking about this, primordial soup, where you got all this stuff, it's just there. And somehow, all this stuff just somehow came into existence all by itself. Like, I don't know. And I'm just thinking it through. And then there was, some lightning storm or something like that. And then, boom, these little one-celled organisms came into existence. And they were asexual in nature. Asexual meaning they just kind of divided in half to create more of the same kinds of things. And I'm going, wow, what are the chances? I remember thinking this. What are the chances of that happening? Like, really? Again, no scriptural training, nothing like that whatsoever. I'm just thinking through the logic of what they were telling me. And then somewhere along the line, those asexual organisms became sexual. Well, they needed another one to reproduce. So then I remember thinking, wow, if that's the case, then you got to have two at the exact same process of evolution, at the exact same time, and all of these millions of years that it takes, in the exact same place. I mean, they couldn't be down the block. This microscopic one-celled organism, all of a sudden, maybe it's 2 cells by now. I don't know. Now all of a sudden, they got to be at the same place. And I thought, well, that just doubled the improbability of that happening. And I'm thinking, really? Is that really what happened? And at that time, scientists talked a lot about finding the missing link. Have you noticed that's also dropped from scientific jargon about evolution. They no longer talk about finding the missing link. And I just, in my mind, I'm going, I wonder why. I wonder why. It used to be a big deal. When we find the missing link, it'll prove evolution. Well, the fossil record, I mean, it was like there are different life forms, but they've never, and I'm just throwing that out there. I kind of wondered. And then I wondered this. Why isn't this process still happening? I mean, if it takes millions and millions and millions of years, some of it got started earlier, some of it would have gotten started later, and then there would be this process of, life evolving into other forms of life. And I remember thinking and asking, I wonder why there's not some subhuman species somewhere on planet Earth that's ready to transition into humans as we know it now. And by the way, one of the justifications for slavery was that people of African descent were subhuman. And women in the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages were considered to be subhuman. It's like, really? And why wasn't that still happening? And I remembered thinking, and I didn't go into, God created the heavens and the earth. I just went thinking, really? There's some holes in this theory. There's some holes. Now, I'm not promoting like a specific 7-day period of time. I have my own opinions and feeling strong about all that stuff. And what's interesting to me is nowhere in the New Testament does it say, you have to believe in creation in order to be saved. Doesn't say that. And it doesn't say, hey, if you believe in evolution, you're damned. Doesn't say that. So it's kind of like, I know there's important things and it's really an important issue, but it's not like the issue. The issue is you exist, I exist, and there are some things that tell us that we are created in the image of God. So we're also created to be like God. If we're created to be like God, why don't you like yourself? Why don't you like yourself? Because that's been stolen from you, from us. That's been stolen from us. Created to be like. And it's my contention that it doesn't get any better than that. Created to be like God. I mean, if you're a basketball player, wouldn't it be great to be created to be like Kobe or LeBron? Like, if that was your, wouldn't that be pretty cool? It's created to be like God. Now, not as God, but like God, created in his image. By the way, isn't it interesting in the New Testament, a couple different places, it talks about God is transforming us and conforming us into the image of his Son. So something about that image of God has been lost. Not in reality, but in our understanding and our experience. But it's still true. It's still in our river. Created to be like God is triune, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You're triune as well, body, soul, and spirit. So that we could go on and on about that. But let me move on quickly. We're created on purpose for a purpose. This was not an accidental creation. This was intentional. God created you on purpose, for a purpose. And for that, what part of that purpose is? It goes back to being created in the image of God. It's created to bring the likeness of God into every relationship and everything that we do. I'm to be a dad like God would be a dad. I'm to be a grandpa like God would be a grandpa. I'm to be a pastor like Jesus would be a pastor. Now, and all those things, I know I got a long way to go. But I know I'm not where I used to be, and I know I'm not where I could be. I'm just somewhere in transition. And that's true for all of us. So the purpose, in the very broadest sense, whether it's being a clerk or whether it's being a CEO, Wherever we fall, whatever it is in our specific, whatever we do, at home or at work or at school, it's created to bring the likeness and the character of God into all that we do. The rest of it's just the details. The rest of it's the details. And they're important. They're important details. But we're created on purpose, for a purpose. We're created and been given an authority to rule and to bring order. As far as I can tell, the only thing that was orderly about planet Earth at that time was the Garden of Eden. And by the way, Adam wasn't created in the garden. He was created outside the garden. And God took the man that he created him and put him in the garden. Check me out on that. See if that's not true. So it could be why guys are a little bit wilder. Just saying. Just saying. I don't know. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that, but it's interesting. But no, it says subdue and rule. One interpretation is fierce mastery. And there's some things that show up a couple chapters later that would have required some fierce mastery. We'll get to that later. But we do not create. We just take what God has created and rearrange it. Mix it together, add this to that, and we come up with new things, but everything that's come up new came in human invention is because we've figured out something or put some couple of things together to make something that we call new. But when God created the heavens and the earth, he put everything here. It was already here. And we just get to discover it. That's what science is about. So we don't create, we organize and rearrange, and that we're using the image of God because he's given us the opportunities to do these things. So now here's another thing. I need to move on quickly. We're created male and female. God created two genders, period. And I know there's huge issues on gender identity issues in our country. Huge. Huge. But you know what statistics are revealing? That somebody after they go through gender surgery, transition from one sex to another, that their mental health issues increase by over 400%. Suicide rate goes up. It's not this, my life, and then this is what you hear reported. My life is so much better now. I really found my niche in life, and it's just not true. And nothing but mercy and compassion and understanding, because it's a huge issue that's in our current culture. And one of the reasons is because we've lost our roots of our created identity. Male is good and female is good. God saw all that he made and said it was very good. Male and female. Male and female. God created two equal but very distinct genders. We didn't choose our existence and we don't choose our gender. I mean, it's even on the genetic chromosome level, we know it to be true. We know it. It's there. So the reality is we are the awesome and good creation of God. Genesis 1:31, God saw all that he had made and it was very good. So I love Psalm 139. And if you have a struggle with identity and self-worth and liking yourself, you should memorize these verses. Psalm 139, 13 through 18. For you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Just stop right there. Here's a guy who was a sinner, David. Understood that he was fearfully and wonderfully made. Not a product of self-made, made. But there was something awesome and wonderful about that. And you need to know that you are the awesome and amazing creation of the living God. And you should treat yourself that way. And that is not a reason for pride. There's no patting ourselves on the back here, folks, right? Because we didn't do it. We received it. Receive it. Receive it for yourself, because this has flown down your river of humanity to you. Male or female, it has come down your river to you. Now, there's some things that have gone into your river that have helped to pollute that in your understanding of that. But one of the things I hope you'll do is to begin to receive this like water. Drink it in. Let it refresh your soul. And then it says we're blessed by God. God blessed them. You know, they sneezed, right? The word is a wonderful word. It means to kneel before. In Hebrew, it would sound something like barak. And it means to kneel before. It's used in Genesis 24 as making camels to kneel down. It's used as man blessing the Lord, like in Psalm 103, bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is the same word. And it's also used of God blessing mankind. Blessed. Aren't you glad to know that God is not cursing you? You may feel cursed, but it doesn't come from God. There may be people that have cursed you, but it doesn't come from God. It doesn't come from God. You need to understand that. God created us good. A good God created us to be good, and we are blessed by God. Now, Genesis 12 tells us that God blessed Abraham with a blessing that was so powerful that it would literally come to the entire world. And do you know that that blessing that was so powerful that it would come to the entire world comes to us through faith in Jesus Christ? This is what Paul said in Galatians chapter 3, verses 13 and 14. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law. Let me just stop there. The curse of the law, what this means is, if you or if a person thinks that by being good enough, I can be pleasing to God, they're living under a curse. Do you know why? Because it's impossible. Because it leads to condemnation. It leads to death and separation from God. Nobody. That's the curse of the law. Even God's law. Somebody says, yeah, I know, I'm going to go to heaven. I keep the 10 Commandments. Most people can't even name the 10 Commandments, let alone keep them. And everybody that approached Jesus like, yeah, I keep the commandments, Jesus kind of had a funny, interesting way of lovingly showing them how wrong they were. Yeah, you read the Gospels. Check me out on that. So it's just cool. So Christ redeems us from the curse of the law because God doesn't want us to be under that curse by becoming a curse for us. You follow this? Christ became a curse so that we wouldn't be cursed. Cursed, because it's written, cursed is everyone who is hung on a pole or on a tree. And the cross was made out of wood, which came from a tree. He redeemed us in order that the blessing given to Abraham might come to the Gentiles or to those who are not, even non-Jewish through Jesus Christ, so that by faith we might receive the promise of the Spirit. We don't have time to develop that more, but here's what I want to leave you with. Christ bore our curse so we could be blessed. Christ bore our curse so that we could be blessed. So some takeaways. You're created by God and for God. You're not self-made and not self-sufficient. You're an awesome creation of the living God. Includes your gender, male or female. God wants you to know that full well. And you can be blessed just like Abraham was blessed. And this comes by faith in the crucified and risen Savior. So next week, we're going to get into that first marriage, and you're going to see some very practical things that are going to be true for your marriage as well. So I want to give you some keep the conversation going, and then we're going to have communion. So here's the keeping the conversation going, at least in your own mind, preferably with somebody else. What are some generational patterns that have come from upstream in your life? Name them. But you don't have to claim them. Name them, identify them, And then ask yourself, is it easy or hard for you to believe that you can be blessed by God? Do you feel like you're cursed because of the family that you grew up in? Like, there's no hope for me. Look at where I'm from. Do you see yourself as an awesome creation of the living God? If not, why not?